The suitcases were always too small for a lifetime. William learned this truth as he zipped shut the final leather bag, the one Isabella had bought him on their 10th anniversary, stamped with his initials in what now felt like arrogant, gleaming gold. He left it there, on the bed, empty of everything except a single forgotten cufflink and the ghost of promises he'd made before he understood what promises truly cost. Outside, the rain fell like a confession. It washed the windows of the apartment he'd once called theirs, blurring the Manhattan skyline into a watercolor of what was and what might have been. He didn't look back, not at the door frame where they'd marked Lily's height every birthday since she could stand, not at the kitchen light Isabella always left on, so the dark doesn't get lonely, she'd say, her voice tinged with a hope he'd gradually stopped hearing. No, William walked. He walked straight into the arms of spring, or what he thought was spring. Her name was Helen, 26, with laughter like wind chimes and a studio apartment that smelled of jasmine and unchecked ambition. She didn't own a single photo frame, and William found that thrilling. No past, only future. No memories, only moments. "You're starting over," she'd whispered against his cheek that first night in her loft. The city lights sprawled beneath them like a carpet of false stars. It's like a novel with the first chapter torn out. He believed her. God, how he believed her. For 3 weeks, life felt like a film montage. Slow-motion mornings, intimate cafes, sex that felt like rebellion, conversations that sparkled with possibility. Helen was everything Isabella wasn't: impulsive, unburdened, gloriously selfish. She didn't ask him if he'd called the plumber or remembered Lily's parent-teacher conference. She asked him what his favorite constellation was, what secret he'd never told anyone, what he wanted to feel before he died. It was exhilarating. It was also, though he didn't realize it yet, incredibly fragile. The call came on a Tuesday morning. William was in a minimalist coffee shop, waiting for his flat white, double shot, oat milk, just like Helen takes it, when his phone buzzed. Not Helen's flirty good morning, but a number he hadn't deleted yet hadn't heard from in 42 days. Isabella's lawyer. The voice on the other end was crisp, legal, cold as a stethoscope on bare skin. "Mr. Evans, this is Miriam Vance. I'm representing your wife." "Ex-wife," William corrected automatically, though the divorce papers weren't even finalized yet. The word felt strange in his mouth, like a pebble he'd accidentally swallowed. A pause on the line, sharp enough to draw blood. "We're filing a motion for full custody of Lily and Ben, given the circumstances." William almost laughed. Circumstances? He was in love. He was free. He was drinking better coffee. What circumstances could possibly? But then the lawyer spoke 9 words that unstitched the sky. "We're citing emotional neglect and instability during the marriage." Emotional neglect? The phrase hung in the air between them, slick and poison familiar. Suddenly, he wasn't in a sunny coffee shop anymore. He was back in their living room, staring at the back of Isabella's head as she folded laundry alone. Again. He was missing Lily's dance recital because of a critical meeting that wasn't critical at all. He was forgetting Ben's science fair, promising to make it up with ice cream that never materialized. He was showing up late, leaving early, his physical presence a placeholder for an emotional one that was consistently, painfully absent. "But I provided," he wanted to scream into the phone. "The house, the vacations, the college funds, the future." But the law, like love, rarely cares for what you meant to do, only what you did. And what William did, or more accurately, what he didn't do, was now being meticulously catalogued and held against him in a family court filing. He stared at his phone long after the call had ended. The screen went black. In its dark reflection, he didn't see the triumphant man who'd traded a weary marriage for a bright new love. He saw a stranger, a man who had confused departure for freedom and selfishness for self-discovery. And the stranger, right there amid the scent of roasted beans and the gentle hum of other people's lives, was weeping. The flat white arrived. He left it on the counter, untouched. The milk foam wilted slowly, a perfect temporary heart dissolving into nothing. He walked out into the daylight, but the world had changed its texture. The sounds of the city, the honking cabs, the snippets of conversation, the distant wail of a siren, all seemed to fold into a single relentless whisper: neglect, neglect, neglect. He found himself on a park bench, watching a father push his young daughter on a swing. The little girl's laughter was a bright, sharp thing in the air, and it pierced William right through the chest. He thought of Ben's hands, small and sure, as they built elaborate Lego towers. He thought of Lily's voice, reading him a story she'd written herself, her eyes searching his for approval he'd been too distracted to give. Isabella hadn't just filed for custody. She had filed a verdict on his fatherhood, and she had won before he'd even known he was on trial. His phone buzzed again, a text from Helen. "Thinking of you. Tonight? I'll cook." The emoji was a twisting strand of spaghetti. It felt absurd, profane. How could he think about pasta when the ground beneath his feet had just collapsed into a canyon? He didn't text back. Instead, he scrolled through his photos until he found one from a year ago. Ben was on his shoulders, Lily was making a funny face, and Isabella was looking not at the camera, but at him. Her expression was complex, a mixture of love, exhaustion, and a question he had never quite answered. He had been the architect of that exhaustion. He had been the one who made her question her own worth, her own reality. He had called it a rough patch. She had called it loneliness. The lawyer had called it neglect. The words from the legal document echoed in his mind, each one a precise, surgical strike. A pattern of pervasive emotional unavailability, failure to provide a stable and nurturing environment, prioritization of personal gratification over parental responsibility. They made it sound so clinical, so intentional, but the truth was messier. The truth was 1,000 small choices, 1,000 tiny abandonments, 1,000 moments where he chose the easy path over the right one. The truth was that he hadn't meant to neglect them. He'd just forgotten to pay attention. He had assumed his presence was enough without ever ensuring it was meaningful. The sun dipped behind a building, casting long, accusing shadows. He knew he should call his own lawyer. He should fight back, draft a counterargument, assemble evidence of his own. But the energy required felt immense, and all he could feel was the weight of his own failure, heavy and final as a stone. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the lesson, and the lesson was just beginning. The stone of William's failure settled deep in his gut, did not simply sit there. It grew. It sent out roots, fibrous and invasive, threading through his veins until every heartbeat felt like an echo of that single, damning word: neglect. He did not go to Helen's that night. He sent a text. "Family emergency. Can't make it. Sorry." A message so brittle and devoid of detail, It seemed to dissolve the moment he hit send. Her reply was a single, silent question mark that hung in the digital void between them. He had no answer for her. How could he explain that the family he'd walked away from was now the only emergency he could comprehend? Instead, he went to a bar he used to frequent with colleagues, a place of dark wood and darker whiskey, where the conversations were about mergers and market shares, never about missing the sound of your son's breathing in the next room. He ordered a double, and the ice in his glass sounded like the cracking of tiny worlds. His own lawyer, a man named Robert, whose suits were too expensive and whose handshake was too dry, met him there. Robert spread the motion out on the bar between their drinks, a surgical field of legal paper. "It's aggressive, William," he said, tapping a paragraph written in a language of cold precision. "She's not just asking for primary custody. She's seeking to minimize your access based on a pattern of behavior. They've attached exhibits, calendar summaries showing your absences, testimonials from others." "What others?" William's voice was hoarse, the whiskey doing nothing to warm the cold place inside him. Robert's eyes flickered with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "The nanny, your mother-in-law, a child psychologist's preliminary assessment of Ben." A child psychologist. The words landed like a physical blow. Ben, his quiet boy with his telescope and his star charts, who'd asked him just last month if black holes were places where light went to be alone. He'd ruffled his hair and said, "Something like that, buddy," before taking a work call. He'd been building a case for a client's software patent. He'd failed to see the black hole opening up in his own living room. The narrative Isabella's lawyer had constructed was a masterpiece of devastating truth. It wasn't libel, it was chronology. It was the story of a man who was present in body, but absent in spirit. A ghost who haunted his own home, leaving a chill of inattention in his wake. They had dates, times, witnesses. They had the crushing weight of factual omission. William's defense that he was a good provider, that he loved his children, sounded pathetic, hollow, a tinny melody played against the symphony of their evidence. Love isn't a feeling you claim, it's an action you perform, and the record of his performances was a catalog of empty seats. He left the bar, the legal papers stuffed into his briefcase feeling like a lead weight. The city, once a playground of his new freedom, now felt like a maze of his own failings. He found himself walking, not toward Helen's neighborhood of artisanal bakeries and curated vintage shops, but toward his old street. He stopped across from his building, a handsome pre-war coated in the golden hue of street lamps. There, in the window of his former living room, he saw them. Isabella was reading on the sofa, her legs tucked under her. She looked tired, but there was a new solidity to her, a quiet resolve that he'd mistaken for resignation during their marriage. Ben was on the floor, assembling a complex model of the Perseverance rover, his small tongue peeking out in concentration, and Lily was practicing ballet, her arms flowing through the air in a graceful porte de bras, her reflection a fleeting dream in the window pane. It was a perfect tableau of a life continuing, beautifully, without him. The pain was so acute, it was almost beautiful. It was the pain of seeing a finished painting and realizing you'd only ever provided the empty canvas. They had built a new harmony from the discord he'd left behind. He didn't know how long he stood there, a ghost at his own feast, but a movement broke the spell. Lily paused her dancing, her eyes scanning the window. For a heart-stopping second, William thought he saw him, a shadow figure haunting his own past. Her gaze passed over him, through him, and she smiled at something her mother said. The moment shattered. He was invisible. He turned away, the image seared onto his retina. This was the turn, the narrative twist that was neither whimsical nor poetic, but brutally, unforgivably real. He had not escaped his old life, he had become its antagonist. His phone vibrated. It was Helen. She was calling. He let it go to voicemail, the screen flashing with her name like a warning beacon from a world that now felt absurdly superficial. How could he explain this to her? How could he describe the specific gravity of parental failure to a woman whose biggest concern was whether her favorite pop-up restaurant would get a permanent location? The voicemail notification popped up. He played it, holding the phone to his ear like a seashell, listening for the ocean and hearing only a swimming pool. "William, hey." Her voice was hesitant, a little hurt. "You've been really weird. This family emergency thing. You can talk to me, you know. I'm not the enemy. Let me in. Call me back." Let me in. The phrase was a key that no longer fit any lock he possessed. His interior world was now a condemned building, full of structural failures and warning signs. Letting her in would only mean witnessing the collapse. He didn't call back. He walked, his feet carrying him with a will of their own, until he stood outside Helen's building. Her light was on. He could go up. He could bury this feeling in the distraction of her youth and the simple geography of her body. He could pretend for a few hours that he was the man she thought he was, free, unencumbered, starting over. But as he reached for the intercom, his hand froze. A memory surfaced, unbidden and cruel. It was Lily's 7th birthday. He'd been in Brussels, closing a deal. He'd video called, his face pixelated and distant on the iPad screen propped on the table. "Daddy," she cried, her face alight. "I got a new bike. It's blue." He'd said, "That's great, sweetie. I gotta run. The clients are here. I love you." And he'd clicked off. The image of her face, already dimming with disappointment, vanishing into a cloud of digital noise. "I love you." The easiest thing to say, the hardest thing to prove. He lowered his hand from the intercom. Going upstairs to Helen wasn't an escape, it was just another form of neglect. It was choosing the easy comfort over the hard truth. It was repeating the very pattern that had brought him to this precipice. He turned his back on her door and walked away into the night. For the first time, he was not walking toward something. He was simply walking away. The motion was familiar, but the meaning had changed entirely. This wasn't liberation. It was penance. The twist was not in the legal papers. The twist was in him. The call from the lawyer wasn't the crisis. It was the symptom. The disease was the man he had chosen to become. And the cure, if there was one, would require a dismantling of everything he thought he knew about love, responsibility, and himself. The trial hadn't started in a courtroom. It was happening now in the silent, echoing courtroom of his own conscience. And he was losing. The courtroom was a temple of clipped syllables and measured silences, a place where human catastrophe was distilled into sterile phrases like "the best interests of the child." William sat beside his lawyer, Robert, who smelled of mint and ambition, a man who fought for wins, not for truths. Across the aisle, Isabella did not look at him. She sat perfectly still, a column of quiet resolve in a simple navy dress, her hands folded in her lap like resting birds. Her lawyer, Miriam Vance, was a scalpel in a human suit. But the true architects of William's judgment were not the lawyers. They were his children. Lily, now 10, was called to speak first. She was led to the stand, her feet swinging slightly above the floor. When asked whom she wanted to live with, she didn't say, "Mom." She said, "I want to live with the parent who remembers I'm alive." The air left William's lungs. It wasn't a line from a lawyer's script. It was a 9-year-old's devastatingly precise summation of his parenthood. The judge, a woman with a face that had seen too many broken families, softened her voice. "Can you explain what you mean, Lily?" And she did. She described the feeling of being a portrait on a wall, looked at but never seen. She talked about practicing her ballet recital piece for weeks, only to have him miss it for a dinner with clients. He said he'd watch the video, Lily said, her small voice clear and unwavering in the hushed room. But he never did. The video is still on his phone. I checked. William's head snapped up. He'd forgotten that video existed. He'd taken it with every intention of watching it, but then a deal had frayed. An email had demanded a response. Helen had sent a funny meme, and the video of his daughter's proud, twirling moment had been buried in the digital detritus of a life he'd prioritized instead. Ben, 8, was next. He didn't want to talk. He'd brought a drawing. The bailiff carried it to the judge. It was a crayon rendering of their family. Isabella, Lily, and Ben were on the ground, detailed and brightly colored, building a rocket ship. William was a stick figure in the upper corner, drawn in black, with a briefcase floating away into a scribbled blue sky. He was connected to them by a single shaky line, a tether, or a leash. "That's Daddy," Ben said softly to the floor. "He's always going somewhere else." The courtroom was silent. Robert leaned over to whisper a legal strategy, a point about alienation, but William waved him off. The truth, drawn in waxy crayon, was the most eloquent argument he had ever witnessed. He was a stick figure, a sketch, a ghost in his children's vibrant world. Then it was Isabella's turn. She did not list his failings. She did not need to. The children had already painted the portrait of his absence. Instead, she spoke about loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, chronic kind that becomes the background hum of a life. "Loneliness isn't about being alone," she said, her gaze finally finding his. It wasn't angry, it was exhausted. "Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being with someone who makes you feel alone. It's hearing your child accomplish something wonderful and having no one to turn to and share that joy with because the other chair is empty, or worse, occupied by a man who is already thinking about something else." She spoke of building a life on a foundation of his intermittent attention, a structure that was forever shaky. "I didn't file for custody to punish him," she said, and William believed her. The terrible truth was that it wasn't punishment. It was protection. "I filed because I finally had to choose between supporting the illusion of his fatherhood or protecting the reality of my children's emotional well-being." The words settled over the room. This was the climax. Not a dramatic reveal, but a quiet, brutal unveiling of a truth everyone but William had already seen. His lawyer urged him to testify, to fight, to promise the moon. William stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket, an armor that felt laughably thin now. He looked at the judge, at his wife, at his children who looked back at him with a quiet, wary curiosity, as if observing a rare animal they'd only read about. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend the man he thought he was. But the man he thought he was no longer existed. He had been a fiction. He began, his voice a rusted hinge. He cleared his throat. The room waited. don't have a defense. Robert stiffened beside him. The things they've said, my children, my Isabella, they're all true. He wasn't conceding defeat, he was conceding to the truth. It was the first truly responsible choice he had made in years. I have spent a lifetime building a case for the wrong client, he said, the words coming slowly, unevenly, like stones he was turning over to see what lived beneath. I thought the client was my career, my ambition, my freedom. He glanced at Helen, who had come to support him, and now sat in the back, her face a beautiful, confused mask. But the client, the only client that ever really mattered, was my family, and I neglected the case. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he didn't ask for shared custody. He looked at the judge, his eyes raw. I need to learn how to be a father, he said, the admission simple and devastating. And I can't do that by fighting them for the right to be one. I support Isabella's petition for full custody. A gasp went through the room. Robert put his head in his hands. Isabella's eyes widened in shock, then filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have no bottom. She had won everything she asked for, and it tasted like ash. William turned and walked out of the courtroom. He didn't go to Helen, he didn't go to a bar, he went to the empty apartment he'd rented in his newfound freedom. He stood in the center of the living room, a space devoid of Legos, ballet slippers, or crayon drawings. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of his victory. Weeks bled into months. The divorce was finalized. He saw the children on scheduled weekends, visits that were initially awkward, a series of stilted conversations and shared pizzas. He didn't try to be their hero, he just tried to be present. He watched the ballet videos. He asked Ben about Mars. He listened. It was clumsy. It was imperfect. But it was a beginning. One afternoon, he was on the floor of his apartment with Ben, helping him with a new astronomy kit. The phone rang. It was Helen. He let it go to voicemail again. He'd called her weeks ago to end it, to explain that his fresh start needed to begin with an honest ending. She'd cried and called him a coward. She wasn't entirely wrong. As the phone stopped ringing, Ben looked up from the telescope he was assembling. "Who was that, Dad?" "No one important, buddy," William said. And for the first time, it was the truth. Ben nodded, satisfied, and held up a lens. "Here, you hold this part. It's tricky." William took the piece of glass carefully, as if it were a fragile star. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the lens and casting a small, wavering circle of light on the far wall. It was tiny. It was temporary. But for now, in the quiet room with his son, it was enough. He was not the man he had been. He was not yet the man he wanted to be. He was somewhere in the middle, in the liminal space between neglect and grace, learning the difficult, beautiful grammar of attention. The story wasn't over. It was just finally, honestly, the beginning.